Hello and welcome to this episode. So let's begin just with allowing us to settle, allowing the mind to slow down. Allowing the breath to naturally rise and fall, and perhaps just bring your awareness to it. I was out walking today. I struggled to leave the flat and to go for a much needed walk, but I was aware that as I was walking, I was aware of my posture. And at some point, I lifted my chest up and out, as one would do when perhaps they're confident, or maybe people do to get some sort of psychological boost from it. But as soon as I did that, there was almost an opening in the body. There was a release of something, and there was a pleasurable feeling about it, a natural feeling, and it just seemed to make sense that perhaps the body's been wanting me to come back to this, what I can say is a natural posture where the back's not arching over, the shoulders are not slumped, and my head and neck are leaning forward, out of alignment from the rest of my body. And it felt like as soon as I lifted my chest, and it was almost as if I was doing a yoga posture. I was just expanding my body and allowing my body to, this may sound strange, but allow my body to just flourish almost towards the sun, as if I was being uncoiled. And so as I was walking, I was noticing sometimes when perhaps I would return back to the old conditioned body posture, and then I would, again just realign myself, raise the chest, which automatically aligns other things, the back and the shoulders. They have to go back when the chest is, it's only a very subtle, chest goes up a couple of inches or out, and naturally that brings the head up, because normally when I'm walking my head's always down and eyes are glued to the floor, and this, just by this one movement, everything seemed to come into alignment, and I almost enjoyed it. I wanted to, stretch up towards the sun almost, and just, my body felt very long in that sense. It felt very, and then, I began to just try and invite an ease to the body as I walked. So there wasn't a stiffness there with that posture. It was almost not I have to stay in this posture because it's correct, but almost there's a connection there. You could feel the space in the body, and you feel there was almost a wanting to do it. And of course, this reflects, we talk about our conditioning of our mind, and perhaps a natural state of being. Perhaps we could make the comparison of, having a rigid body where the shoulders are slumped over, and it's almost, if you were to look side on in the mirror, you'd probably notice it more there, where, you're hunched over and there's a rigidity about it. And perhaps you can compare that with the mind. The mind is very rigid. It's got its expectations, its rules, old conditions, old reaction patterns that fire off when something happens. And then there's the fluidity of being, the natural state where, as the body uncoils in a natural state, the heavy thoughts are released. The flow charts of the mind, of going through the maze of thoughts, those are all swept away. And it got me thinking about, how other practices can assist in this as well. You talk about, as I was walking, I was listening to a podcast, and the speaker was talking about, chakras and the energy of the body awareness, and there's many practices for that as well, like yoga or qigong or tai chi. So I just wanted to mention that, something I've just become aware of today. And just before I started this, I purchased a book by a doctor named Gabor Mate, and I've listened to some podcasts he's done, and I purchased a book, When the Body Says No, and it's about the cost of dealing with hidden stress. And again, this can link into what we've mentioned in Eckhart's teachings about the pain body, and emotions that are not dealt with in the present moment. They're restored in the body and then activated, and there's a huge wave, not just that emotion, that stored emotion, all of the stored emotions together. And Eckhart refers to that as the pain body, and so, and the reason why I, what led me to Gabor's work, and especially this book, was just my own intuition about my own mental health. I've talked previously about feeling unwell. I've used that word, unwell, and I guess it can be very hard to articulate, and also to be sure. Sometimes it's too easy to just give loads of labels to things, but sometimes those labels, they may send you down the wrong path. It may not be quite what you mean, and then sometimes you may take on that label when it's not quite accurate. But for myself, I had this intuition that, I'm heading towards some serious illness, whether it's some form of dementia or some form of cognitive disability where, my mind will be unable to function in a healthy way, to the point where, I may not be able to take care of myself. And so this has led me to purchasing this book, to perhaps get an understanding of, perhaps there's something in me that is being repressed, or perhaps, we talked about uncoiling the body, perhaps, emotionally, the way I am, the trauma I have endured. We've all, endured some sort of stress or trauma in our lives, especially when we, in our younger years. And it's about, almost understanding that and addressing that, in order to try and heal those emotional wounds. And it's a strange feeling because part of me doesn't have the energy to do this work. I find that my ability to absorb information and, specifically, like reading non-fiction books or books where, such as the one I just purchased, is, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of hard work and a lot of perhaps struggle reading it to, my stamina for reading, books that have knowledge, books that where, you're not only do you just take it in, but the work has to be done, so. But something in me led me to purchase it. So perhaps, again, it's this, perhaps some trust there with the universe of the unfolding of what's happening in the present moment. Perhaps it's not for me to worry about the struggle and just simply take this moment and that's all we have. And in one of Gabel's talks, he talked about, examples and case studies of people who have had an intuition of illness, and this is what chimed with me. And I was like, oh, I've been having that as well, and that connection was made. So there's almost a whole, when we think about spirituality, there's almost a vast world of different things that can be done. We talk about, the practice of being present, but then there's different, teachers with their own styles. There's, different practices of meditations, lots of techniques and traditions as well, religious traditions and spiritual traditions, many paths, many methods. We mentioned in the past Vipassana, and we've talked about, Buddhism and Thich Nhat Hanh and his, his teachings from Buddhism, and even practices such as yoga, or just mention qigong and tai chi and various body awareness practices. So we talk about the non-rigidity or the fluidity of being, and this is it here. It's almost where you don't have to try and fit in with something and hope it works. You can just almost see what fits in with you. Perhaps for one person yoga may be perfect for them in terms of creating that body awareness, that mindfulness of the body, cultivating that sensitivity, so when there is something that's not quite in alignment to who you are, then you can address it immediately. There isn't any repression of it, no almost unhealthy anger where that anger's not addressed, it's almost suppressed. And for another person it may be Tai Chi, the slow body movements of Qigong, which is something I have had a desire to look into. It hasn't happened as of yet, but it's there. It's somewhere there below the surface, that somehow, at some point, I'm sure I find myself, watching a video and engaging in that as well. And for others, there may be a certain tradition that they follow, and perhaps, other practices can complement them, such as mindfulness and, teachings of Eckhart or Mooji, various other teachers as well. So perhaps that keyword fluidity, that something that brings, that's not rigid, and we can almost sense it as well when a situation happens. You can almost sense there's some resistance happening here, and perhaps when you are aware, you can sense that resistance and think, okay, perhaps something needs to change here. Perhaps I need to step away from this, or there's some communication needs to happen, and usually in the unconscious, when this happens, the resistance is brought to the mind, and there's a reaction, a critical reaction to it, and this shouldn't be happening, or this person is wrong, or this situation shouldn't have happened, and there's the key word shouldn't, which is a word for the mind, not aware that the universe is simply flowing. But the mind wants to go against the current and almost try and change the direction of the water after it's passed. So, it's insane to do it in the moment as it's flowing, but retrospectively looking back at it, you can almost see the insanity of it, of not accepting what is in this moment. Okay, so I'm going to load up the power of now and continue the momentum of the reading of this book. And it says we're about 87% through, so we're almost into the last portion of the book. So this is chapter 10, and it has a title for the chapter is The Meaning of Surrender. And then it has a title for the upcoming section of this chapter, which is Acceptance of the Now. And it starts with a question and a statement from the reader. And for those just joining, I believe these are common questions collected by Eckhart. I'm not exactly sure how he received them. Not sure if this book was previewed and then questions were raised, but he's gathered the most common questions or joined questions together to address the main what comes up for people in regards to what's been written. So, question: you mentioned surrender a few times. I don't like that idea. It sounds somewhat fatalistic. If we always accept the way things are, we are not going to make any effort to improve them. It seems to me what progress is all about, both in our personal lives and collectively, is not to accept the limitations of the present, but to strive to go beyond them and create something better. If we hadn't done this, we would still be living in caves. How do you reconcile surrender with changing things and getting things done? Answer: to some people, surrender may have negative connotations, implying defeat, giving up, failing to rise to the challenges of life, becoming lethargic, and so on. True surrender, however, is something entirely different. It does not mean to passively put up with whatever situation you find yourself in and to do nothing about it. Nor does it mean to cease making plans or initiating positive action. Surrender is the simple but profound wisdom of yielding to rather than opposing the flow of life. The only place where you can experience the flow of life is the now. So to surrender is to accept the present moment unconditionally and without reservation. It is to relinquish inner resistance to what is. Inner resistance is to say no to what is, through mental judgment and emotional negativity. It becomes particularly pronounced when things go wrong, which means that there is a gap between the demands or rigid expectations of your mind and what is. That is the pain gap. If you have lived long enough, you will know that things go wrong quite often. It is precisely at those times that surrender needs to be practiced if you want to eliminate pain and sorrow from your life. Acceptance of what is immediately frees you from mind identification and thus reconnects you with being. Resistance is the mind. Surrender is a purely inner phenomenon. It does not mean that on the outer level you cannot take action and change the situation. In fact, it is not the overall situation that you need to accept when you surrender, but just a tiny segment called the now. For example, if you were stuck in the mud somewhere, you wouldn't say, "Okay, I resign myself to being stuck in the mud." Resignation is not surrender. You don't need to accept an undesirable or unpleasant life situation, nor do you need to deceive yourself and say that there is nothing wrong with being stuck in the mud. No, you recognize fully that you want to get out of it. You then narrow your attention down to the present moment without mentally labeling in any way. This means that there is no judgment of the now. Therefore, there is no resistance, no emotional negativity. You accept the isness of this moment. Then you take action and do all that you can to get out of the mud. Such action I call positive action. It is far more effective than negative action, which arises out of anger, despair, or frustration. Until you achieve the desired result, you continue to practice surrender by refraining from labeling the now. Let me give you a visual analogy to illustrate the point I am making. You are walking along a path at night, surrounded by a thick fog. But you have a powerful flashlight that cuts through the fog and creates a narrow, clear space in front of you. The fog is your life situation, which includes past and future. The flashlight is your conscious presence. The clear space is the now. Non-surrender hardens your psychological form, the shell of the ego, and so creates a strong sense of separateness. The world around you, and people in particular, come to be perceived as threatening. The unconscious compulsion to destroy others through judgment arises, as does the need to compete and dominate. Even nature becomes your enemy, and your perceptions and interpretations are governed by fear. The mental disease that we call paranoia is only a slight, more acute form of this normal but dysfunctional state of consciousness. Not only your psychological form, but also your physical form, your body, becomes hard and rigid through resistance. Tension arises in different parts of the body, and the body as a whole contracts. The free flow of life energy through the body, which is essential for its healthy functioning, is greatly restricted. Bodywork and certain forms of physical therapy can be helpful in restoring this flow, but unless you practice surrender in your everyday life, those things can only give temporary symptom relief, since the cause, the resistance pattern, has not been dissolved. There is something within you that remains unaffected by the transient circumstances that make up your life situation, and only through surrender do you have access to it. It is your life, your very being, which exists eternally in the timeless realm of the present. Finding this life is the one thing that is needed, that Jesus talked about. So we come to the stop and pause symbol. So here Eckhart talks about the power of surrender, and he talks about true surrender, which is not resisting the present moment. And by not resisting the present moment, there is no pain that is created. And by not resisting the present moment, the action taken, as he says, will be positive. It won't be a place, acting from anger or frustration. You fully accept it. For his example, I'm stuck in the mud. And perhaps to give you a funny example, the other day I was having lunch and I had the plate on this lap tray. I was eating on my lap. There was a lap tray and I had my plate on it, and I leaned forward to my laptop to change the volume of what I was watching, and the plate slid off, flipped over, and the sandwich I was eating went all over the floor. The sauce was on the carpet and crisps were everywhere, and for a moment I just sat and just looked, and perhaps there was an example there where I surrendered. I thought, okay, this is the current situation, this accepting the isness of now. And then I thought, okay, what positive action can I do from here? So I focused on the now and first picked up the plate, then gradually picked up all of the big pieces of food on the floor with my hand. Then, I hoovered up the small pieces. I used a sponge and some washing up liquid to scrub the carpet, and perhaps for me that was an example of surrender. And again, Eckhart says here, it doesn't mean that you just accept the situation, but you accept the present moment. And there's a huge difference in that, as Eckhart says. And Eckhart talks about, what we mentioned at the start, the flow of energy, and how that can be reflected in the body, as well as the practice of non-resistance. So, everything is connected and everything can be affected. It says here that non-surrender hardens your psychological form, the shell of the ego, and so creates a strong sense of separateness. Then later he says not only your psychological form but also your physical form as well. Those emotions we talk about, those are the reactions from the thoughts. The thoughts that are reflected in the body, the emotions take place in the body, and that is what is reflected. And this is even going back to mentioning Gabor's work again, where we talk about the illness of the body and those emotions that are not resolved, or those unhealthy emotions. That is what can lead to a lot of physical and mental illness. Okay, so let's continue. If you find your life situation unsatisfactory or even intolerable, it is only by surrendering first that you can break the unconscious resistance pattern that perpetuates that situation. Surrender is perfectly compatible with taking action, initiating change, or achieving goals. But in the surrendered state, a totally different energy, a different quality flows into your doing. Surrender reconnects you with the source energy of being. And if your doing is infused with being, it becomes a joyful celebration of life energy that takes you more deeply into the now. Through non-resistance, the quality of your consciousness, and therefore the quality of whatever you are doing or creating, is enhanced immeasurably. The results will then look after themselves and reflect that quality. We could call this surrendered action. It is not work as we have known it for thousands of years. As more humans awaken, the word work is going to disappear from our vocabulary, and perhaps a new word will be created to replace it. It is the quality of your consciousness at this moment that is the main determinant of what kind of future you will experience. So to surrender is the most important thing you can do to bring about positive change. Any action you take is secondary. No truly positive action can arise out of an unsurrendered state of consciousness. Question: I can see that if I am in a situation that is unpleasant or unsatisfactory, and I completely accept the moment as it is, there will be no suffering or unhappiness. I will have risen above it, but I still can't quite see where the energy or motivation for taking action and bringing about change would come from if there isn't a certain amount of dissatisfaction. Answer: in the state of surrender, you see very clearly what needs to be done, and you take action, doing one thing at a time and focusing on one thing at a time. Learn from nature. See how everything gets accomplished and how the miracle of life unfolds without dissatisfaction or unhappiness. That's why Jesus said, "Look at the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin." If your overall situation is unsatisfactory or unpleasant, separate out this instant and surrender to what is. That's the flashlight cutting through the fog. Your state of consciousness then ceases to be controlled by external conditions. You are no longer coming from reaction and resistance. Then look at the specifics of the situation. Ask yourself, is there anything I can do to change the situation, improve it, or remove myself from it? If so, you take appropriate action. Focus not on the 100 things that you will or may have to do at some future time, but on the one thing that you can do now. This doesn't mean you should not do any planning. It may well be that planning is the one thing you can do now. But make sure you don't start to run mental movies, project yourself into the future, and so lose the now. Any action you take may not bear fruit immediately. Until it does, do not resist what is. If there is no action you can take, and you cannot remove yourself from the situation either, then use the situation to make you go more deeper into surrender, more deeply into the now, more deeply into being. When you enter this timeless dimension of the present, change often comes about in strange ways, without the need for a great deal of doing on your part. Life becomes helpful and cooperative. If inner factors such as fear, guilt, or inertia prevented you from taking action, they will dissolve in the light of your conscious presence. Do not confuse surrender with an attitude of "I can't be bothered anymore," or "I just don't care anymore." If you look at it closely, you will find that such an attitude is tainted with negativity in the form of hidden resentment, and so is not surrender at all, but masked resistance. As you surrender, direct your attention inward to check if there is any trace of resistance left inside you. Be very alert when you do so, otherwise a pocket of resistance may continue to hide in some dark corner in the form of a thought or an unacknowledged emotion. And now there is a new title for this upcoming section: From Mind Energy to Spiritual Energy. And it begins with a question. Letting go of resistance is easier said than done. I still don't see clearly how to let go. If you say it is by surrendering, the question remains, how? Answer. Start by acknowledging that there is resistance. Be there when it happens, when the resistance arises. Observe how your mind creates it, how it labels the situation, yourself or others. Look at the thought process involved. Feel the energy of the emotion. By witnessing the resistance, you will see that it serves no purpose. By focusing all your attention on the now, the unconscious resistance is made conscious, and that is the end of it. You cannot be conscious and unhappy, conscious and in negativity. Negativity, unhappiness, or suffering in whatever form means that there is resistance, and resistance is always unconscious. Question: surely I can be conscious of my unhappy feelings? Answer: would you choose unhappiness? If you did not choose it, how did it arise? What is its purpose? Who is keeping it alive? You say that you are conscious of your unhappy feelings, but the truth is that you are identified with them and keep the process alive through compulsive thinking. All that is unconscious. If you were conscious, that is to say, totally present in the now, all negativity would dissolve almost instantly. It could not survive in your presence. It can only survive in your absence. Even the pain body cannot survive for long in your presence. You keep your unhappiness alive by giving it time. That is its lifeblood. Remove time through intense present moment awareness, and it dies. But do you want to die? Have you truly had enough? Who would you be without it? Until you practice surrender, the spiritual dimension is something you read about, talk about, get excited about, write books about, think about, believe in, or don't, as the case may be. It makes no difference. Not until you surrender does it become a living reality in your life. When you do, the energy that you emanate and which then runs your life is of a much higher vibrational frequency than the mind energy that still runs our world, the energy that created the existing social, political, and economic structures of our civilization, and which also continuously perpetuates itself through our educational systems and the media. Through surrender, spiritual energy comes into the world. It creates no suffering for yourself, for other humans, or any other life form on the planet. Unlike mind energy, it does not pollute the earth, and it is not subject to the law of polarities, which dictates that nothing can exist without its opposite, that there can be no good without bad. Those who run on mind energy, which is still the vast majority of the Earth's population, remain unaware of the existence of spiritual energy. It belongs to a different order of reality and will create a different world when a sufficient number of humans enter their surrendered state and so become totally free of negativity. If the earth is to survive, this will be the energy of those who inhabit it. Jesus referred to this energy when he made his famous prophetic statement in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the gentle, they shall have the earth for their possession." It is a silent but intense presence that dissolves the unconscious patterns of the mind. They may still remain active for a while, but they won't run your life anymore. The external conditions that were being resisted also tend to shift or dissolve quickly through surrender. It is a powerful transformer of situations and people. If conditions do not shift immediately, your acceptance of the now enables you to rise above them. Either way, you are free. So I'll pause it here for this episode. I notice perhaps I'm feeling a bit tired, so it feels a bit of a struggle to read any further, so this may be a good place to pause during this section. And you can notice some of the other sections being mentioned here about the other realities and how reality would be, or how the earth, the world would be with more beings on this higher vibrational frequency. And Eckhart talks about, he almost brings up a mirror of the world right now, especially, in certain areas such as politically, social and economics, how the world is run right now. And he almost brings up a mirror of how, the mind energy is running the world. And you can almost see the destruction and, various forces in the world. And that's all, unconscious, agendas, unconscious actions that are being taken, that are just unfolding in this manner. And so surrender is the answer. The acceptance of now. And allowing that to flow into the doing if action needs to be done. And so we go back to the simplicity of the now, and what is overlooked by the mind, which is in a state of complexity. And I'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well in this moment, and I will speak to you again very soon. Take care.